Today's session is meant to be fun, where we can kind of all get together, share some stories, and hopefully walk away with some solutions on how we can potentially make this tax season better. Maybe we're already starting to think about next year when we're going to implement some of those changes. So, and I'd love to go ahead and have our panelists introduce themselves. So maybe we'll start with Keila, and then we'll kind of just go down the line here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Keila Hill-Trawick. I run a firm called Little Fish Accounting just outside of DC, and we work with very small service providers, generally with one owner, and tiny teams doing accounting and tax work on holistic year-round basis.
Hey, everyone. I'm Blake. I am the creator of Earmark, where you can earn CPE for listening to podcasts. And I'm the host of the Accounting Podcast, one of the podcasts on there. And excuse me, I'm just getting over the flu. Would love to see you on Earmark, earmarkcpe.com or earmark.app, and listen to the Accounting Podcast.
Hello, I'm Jason. Let's see. I last ran an accounting firm a couple of years ago. It was an 80-year-old tax firm, and I can tell you, a lot of those years I wasn't hanging out on a podcast on February 11th. But it's great to be here now. I produce content around running small firms. And exist kind of on all of the online channels that you could possibly put yourself out there.
Moving right along, I think we want to start. First question, I think we'll go to Blake for this one. I think client requests, especially going into tax season, can always be interesting. So do you have a specific story or example of a crazy client request that you received when you were back running your firm?
So I was on the client accounting services side. I did bookkeeping, accounting, never did tax myself. So when I think of tax season, I think of 1099s. And that was always the beginning of it. And I think the funniest thing that ever happened was, this actually happened multiple times. We had clients ask us not to send 1099s to particular individuals who had received more than $600 in payments in the course of a year. And that was always an interesting conversation to have with them. And ultimately, we would say, if you'd like us to do the 1099s, we're going to have to follow the rules, but you're welcome to do them yourself if you like.
I appreciate you making sure you're following the rules there. Maybe for you, Keila, we talk about scope, how things can potentially get out of scope when it comes to tax season and new engagements with clients. What's your kind of policy in your firm? How do you think about scope creep with those clients to kind of avoid those additional requests and doing that additional work?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is once a client knows that you know how to do something, whether you do it for them or not, they want to just really quickly have you potentially do it for them. And so since we do tax and we do accounting, we had a lot of tax clients, not a lot, but we had a few tax clients who would not want bookkeeping service for us, but continuously have bookkeeping questions on things that they were DIYing. And I will say early on, we answered a lot of questions that we probably shouldn't have, in the spirit of like client experience and wanting to feel like they were being taken care of, but it meant that we were doing a lot of work for free. And so ultimately we settled on the idea that we will tell you where to go to get that information. We may provide a link so that you know how to do it yourself, but not really get bogged down in the details of customized or personalized information about how they take care of something. But it's definitely something to pay attention to, specifically when you do more than one kind of service. Because unlike those who just do one, they're like, well, I know you know how, so could you just tell me really fast? And you got to be careful. Otherwise, a lot of stuff can go out of scope.
Yeah. Jason, anything from your end? You mentioned the 80-year-old CPA firm. I'm sure you might have gotten some crazy client requests over the years. Anything to share?
Oh my gosh, yes. And it was, my firm we bought out a number of old partners. And so it was just kind of a mishmash client base of anything and everything that you could imagine. And so even the notion of being able to say, here's what scope is, when you had like such an across the board client base was so challenging. And that we sort of baby stepped towards trying to get everybody on the same page about an agreed upon framework of kind of, here's what the default is. Here's what kind of package 1, package 2, package 3 looks like. Because until you get there, it's hard to even set those boundaries and get the entire team to agree upon what those boundaries are. I would say that was probably our biggest struggle initially.
Blake, I know from your standpoint, mentioned the client accounting services side. How did you think about those different packages, laying out scope? How did you think about that? Did you have a similar model where there was different levels of service that clients could fall into?
We had that. We had the classic 3 options on our website, and we got pretty good at bucketing clients into those packages, controlling scope. We used Ignition, so we were collecting our monthly fee every month, not worrying about that, and that was great. I would say the thing we never quite mastered was getting our clients to get us what we needed to do the work. And so what would inevitably happen with a certain percentage of them is that we would charge them throughout the year. We would do our part of the work, but a lot of it couldn't get done because we didn't have what we needed from them. Maybe we didn't have access to a particular account. We didn't have statements. We didn't have receipts, whatever it is. We couldn't do the work. And so as the business scaled up, as it got bigger, we had more and more of those clients that just kind of got deferred future work to be done. And we'd already collected the fees. So then when tax season rolls around and the clients wake up and they come back, there's a lot of work to be done. So that was always the biggest challenge for us, was like, how do we uncompress the work? How do we get what we need earlier? I don't know if I ever figured that out completely or have a perfect solution, but I think it would have been good in our engagement letters to have more provisions that say, hey, if you don't get us what we need by this date, we are not going to finish your books by this date. Yeah. Some sort of like delay in there would be necessary, right? Because we can't do it all at once.
No, it's a good point. And I think that workflow compression and moving to more of a scheduled work. Jason, you've talked about this a bit. Like, what are you seeing in firms to try to solve that problem that Blake just laid out there?
For sure, like as you're doing bookkeeping work coming into tax season, like it's very good to be explicit about what is the expected turnaround time, but equally important to share the flip side of that, of here are your responsibilities, X, Y, and Z, for us to uphold that. A lot of times we come into that with good faith and be like, well, no person would reasonably expect us to be able to turn this work around if we don't have everything. But we've all been proven wrong on that many times. I think the biggest shift right now for tax firms in particular is, like you mentioned, a move to more scheduled work. We put ourselves in a really tough spot when, I think the basic version of this that most people do is you have kind of a cutoff date. If you want your return to go out by 4/15, you got till 3/1 or 3/15 or something like that. And there's nothing to stop everyone from making a run on the bank on 3/1 or 3/15. So you get 100 returns in, and you put yourself in a position where you are expected to do something that's just fundamentally impossible, and we don't necessarily know the way out. And that's a really frustrating spot to be in. I spent 5 or 6 years of firm ownership in that spot. And so folks moving to taking more control over the intake schedule so that they can deliver on a consistent delivery schedule, that's probably the biggest thing I see changing right now.
Keila, what about from your point of view? Like, what are you doing at your firm to try to avoid that? Are you setting those firm client deadlines at the start of the year, or how do you think about that? Making sure that workflow doesn't kind of get out of hand at certain points of the year. In Jason's example of set the deadline at 3/1, but then everything comes in on 3/1.
Yeah, I mean, we do a couple of things differently. The first is that we don't take standalone tax returns. And so you have to be part of our annual service. You pay that all up front. You don't pay that month over month. And so you pay it at the beginning and you give us the stuff that we need. And if you don't meet deadlines or get all of your things in the way that you're supposed to, within your engagement letter, we tell you that it's required by these deadlines. Otherwise, we won't do it and there's no refunds. So like we tell them at the beginning. It doesn't solve for everyone, but it solves for a lot of people because they have at least this feeling of like money is already out the door. I should do all of the things because I've already paid you for it. I would say the other thing is that because we only do it on a year-round basis, we know exactly who's going to be in the service towards the beginning. And so we can really eliminate being surprised by how many returns we do. We know exactly what the capacity is for how many returns we do and how much work we do across the year. And so kind of to Jason's point, even if everybody did a run on us and had it all to us on the final day of the deadline, there aren't so many returns that it would overwhelm us. I don't think that's true for a lot of firms. I think this idea of scheduling across time, of making expectations based on when you get me all of the information, not when you hit the button, is really important. I think that if we don't set those expectations for clients to say, I know you said you gave me everything, but actually you just gave me a blank organizer where you said yes to everything and didn't give me any attachments, your stuff can't start today, is a start. I think on top of that, really keeping clients up to date about where things stand. I think that we don't always take the power to say, you submitted it today, so I will have it to you by this date, which is different from if you have it to me on this date, I promise I'll have it by the deadline, really staggering what that looks like. But transparency is really important there. Clients need to know when you're actually starting, when they can expect to receive something. It will not eliminate all of the where's my tax return questions, but at least you can potentially be proactive about letting them know where things stand before they have to ask you.
And I know, Blake, when we were discussing beforehand, you brought up this concept of surge pricing, which people might think of maybe when they call an Uber and the price goes up. Maybe talk through what you mean by surge pricing there and what you're seeing some firms do around that.
It's really simple. If if you have limited capacity at a certain time of year, consider raising your prices and charge less at other times of the year. And there's kind of two ways to do it psychologically. One is you say it's going to cost twice as much if you want me to do it before April, if somebody comes to you now, whatever that surge might be. The other option could be to simply present the price for doing it today and then say there's a discount of 50% if you do it after the deadline. I think it just depends on, how you like to present it. I think generally people like to save money more than, feel like they're paying a penalty. So it might be good to gross up the price and then add in a discount to encourage people to do it later. I don't see very many firms doing it. I'd be curious to know if anyone in the chat has ever tried this. We definitely increased our prices for bookkeeping catch-up work significantly during tax season because otherwise we would just get inundated with it. So, I have done it and it works and I recommend it. I'd be curious to know what others are doing.
Yeah. And Jason, from your point, we've talked about potential payment up front, so getting some skin in the game there. Also, surge pricing. Any thoughts on how you did things in your firm, or what's a good first step? I know, implementing surge pricing might seem like a tough first step for people that are still billing after the fact or chasing up all this work. So maybe how would you think about that?
The first step is to not let another client in the door under the old framework, because what's actually hard about this is changing the expectation from what it used to be. So you'll come to stuff like this and you'll be like, oh, that's a good idea. This is a good idea. But then you go back, you take it back to the team and you're like, okay. And you just start rolling in your head all the people that are going to gripe about that change. But a funny thing happens when that's the rule for the next new person that comes in. They're like, okay, cool. No big deal. And oftentimes, because we're so intimidated by the how emotionally taxing making that changes on your current clients, you just keep letting people in the door under that old framework, and the problem just kind of keeps getting worse. Now, the downside is you don't want to have 100 different systems for all your different clients, right? But making a change say you're going to start billing up front. When we put all of our clients on Ignition, we went from all after the fact hourly billing to the step one was just getting a payment method up front. And then we would auto bill it when the project was complete. And so I wasn't asking for any money. It's kind of like, deposit at a hotel or something like that. We want to have your card on file. And by giving us that and agreeing to the engagement letter, you give us permission to charge the card when the project's done, as long as it comes in within the price range that we provided. That was a little less stressful than saying hey, I got to pay 50% up front. So it's going to look a little different for each firm, I think, what the baby steps are to get you to where you want to be. But also don't forget about new clients and how that's really a new opportunity to do something different.
And we think about another change. I know this has come up. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the chat and the questions. I think inevitably it comes back to pricing, and for firms that are maybe on that traditional method of time cost billing and billing after the fact. If we want to go to quoting a price up front, I guess does anyone have kind of a recommendation on year one? How do we, how can we actually move away from showing the fee at the end to showing the fee up front, which could enable us to potentially take some of that payment up front, or even, as Jason just referenced, getting that payment method on file?
I think some of this starts with the organizer and the questions that you can ask up front. There often feels like this feeling from accountants of like, I will just have no idea how much it will cost until I get to the very end. And for some people, that'll be the case. But like, you have a general idea of what it takes to do a Schedule C. You have a general idea of what is included on a Schedule A. And while you won't know every single thing that's included for everyone at the beginning, and there will be some surprises, I think there are ways in which we could just ask better questions at the beginning to give a better estimate of what that looks like, whether that is how many states do you have? How many businesses do you have? What kind of stock issues might we be running into? Because accountants, a lot of us have been doing this long enough to at least have a general sense of how long that would take and how much effort it would take. And if you can come up with a price, even if externally it is not positioned as a per form or per business price, if internally you can build something that kind of lines up with that, you have a better way to be transparent at the beginning about what people are walking into. I think what clients want to avoid is this idea that you do their tax return and they find out at the end whether they owe you $1,000 or $10,000. And there are ways that we can mitigate that at the beginning. There are ways that once we get that organizer or that information from them, we can give an update to say, hey, you told me you only had 2 businesses, but what you submitted says you have 6. We need to reevaluate and give you a new pricing update. The more information that we can give at the beginning and as we're going through things, the less clients potentially have an issue with giving you their information and their money up front, because they know what they're walking into and don't have to be scared of the nickel and diming or brand new upcharge at the end that they weren't expecting.
No, I think that was another question just came in around that too, of when we discover those things, when we actually start into that work. Keila, I think you just mentioned that you actually go ahead and adjust their scope, adjust their pricing right away, or in the case, would you potentially wait till renewal? Is that right, that you go ahead and adjust that as soon as you find that scope has changed?
Yeah, I mean, really, you owe me for the work that I'm doing right now. So if your scope has changed, you have actually only paid for the work that I was expecting to do. And if now you have a new thing that I didn't include in the prior pricing, we need to address that now. I will say that some of this goes even further back to like how you got the client in the first place and the questions that you were asking. The more detailed you can be around like how they even got to sign on with your firm, the less surprised you are when they start having those conversations. So whether that's the discovery call or the application or the scope of work that you're setting up, the things that you're doing there make it a little bit easier when you get to the organizer and that request for information, and make that much easier when additional things come up. But it also helps to have that information in your engagement letter. So telling them the price that I'm giving you and the scope that I'm building is around the things that we talked about. If anything significantly changes, we reserve the right to make those updates as they come along. Otherwise, I think it happens too often where we wait too far to the end or wait till renewal. You didn't get paid for that work. The client is now surprised that you're charging them for a thing that they thought was free. And now you're not going to get paid for that additional scope anyway.
We do have another poll coming in, so we'll kind of look at these answers as you fill them out in real time. So what do you feel like is that biggest tax season challenge? I think working too many hours is off to an early lead here. People might feel that. All of the above, definitely agree. Anyone have any thoughts on what we're seeing here in real time?
Yeah, Ryan, you don't chase late payments until after the deadline. That's when you get paid. You take that vacation for a couple of weeks and put off all the stuff you said you were going to do right after the deadline and start calling people then.
One time I did not pay my I don't think I paid my 2022 tax return fee until 2024. That actually happened to me.
I cannot imagine.
And that's because I didn't have a bill to pay until 2 years later, believe it or not.
Yeah, so maybe we're still chasing late payments from 2023 returns. So that could be top of the line. We're not even thinking about this year yet. So thanks everybody for answering that. We will have a couple more poll questions throughout, so encourage you to answer those. I do want to jump into some of the audience submitted questions. I think this is one that's come up a little bit, but I'd love to kind of get everyone's take on this. We talked about organizers capturing information up front. Let's say we have an awesome new client portal where our client knows exactly what they need to upload, but they're actually still not updating what we need. Maybe over to you, Jason. What are your thoughts on that? Where you're just getting those piecemeal documents. Maybe you have the portal in place, you've got the checklist in place. What do we do now?
Oh, man, we got great software for this now. The biggest tech change, tax, if you work in tax, the tech, it's not great. But that the biggest change we've had the last few years has been tax intake tools. So not a replacement for your tax software, but tax intake tools that will take actual pro forma data and collect all that stuff from your clients, hounding them until they get it all in. And I know that there's some fear of automated follow-ups. Does my client really want to talk with a piece of software to submit all that information to me? And I definitely grappled with that, but boy, it would be so nice if we could just let the machines do the requesting and the humans do the actual valuable stuff. You don't need to pay me umpteen hundreds of dollars an hour to send you an email to say, hey, Craig, thanks for 1, 3, 5, and 7, but I still need all the other ones. And that can really easily take up, chasing people and figuring out what you need and what you got last time, it can easily take up 30% of busy season if you're just hounding folks. Honestly, the problem that I think software is a solution for now, and it's only really gotten good enough in the last maybe 24 months. But I would love for me and my team to be above hounding other adults for documents, which I know sounds a little kind of high and mighty, but the fact that we have the tools that will enable that now, oh my gosh, I would just to not have to do the picking it up and putting it down and picking it up, that's so frustrating.
Nice. I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit with Jason here. Don't get me wrong. I love tech, and I love what you talk about when it comes to these client intake apps and requesting the documents and all that, because I would love it if my tax preparer had that. But he does something a little bit old school, which actually works, which is he has an admin that calls me until I get him what he needs. And that's also very effective. And I think the two in combination would be the perfect blend and this goes to what you're saying, Jason, which is you don't want people who are preparing tax returns or reviewing them to be involved in data collection. But these days, it's pretty easy to get an admin type person who could, in combination with that tool that you've got, do the collection. It's very easy for me to ignore an automated email and not feel bad about it. But if somebody is calling me personally and leaving messages and in a very nice way, that is a lot harder to ignore. So I wonder, if that's the best of both worlds.
I would say to split the difference, that's another person that you have to manage, have on the team, do potentially to be a reminder, but I would imagine that they have other jobs that they are also doing in the firm. And as the firm owner, do I want you spending your time calling for a thing that I already sent you in order to do? Or do I want you pulling all the documents together or making sure that they're in the right place? So I don't think that's a wrong thing. I do think that for very small firms, especially those that are more than just one and the admin or one and a preparer and an admin, it can be really difficult to justify having another personnel that I wouldn't have otherwise needed if people would listen. One of the other things that I'll add to that is something simple that we can do is to tell clients that we're not going to start until everything is in. Because I think that a lot of people assume that you will begin with the documents that they have given you. And if they only have one more document for you, you'll just slide that last one in and then you can finish the return. And I think if we set the expectation from the beginning that if you give me 1, 3, 5, and 7, and I'm waiting on 4 and 6, your return won't even be started until all of those items are in, gives people a sense of urgency, yes, but also not an expectation that like, but I had given you the rest of the stuff 2 months ago. How come you couldn't just add this last document for me? It gives them an idea of when their work will be done, but also lays out an expectation of how long it's actually going to take us to do it once we've received everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can respond there for the cross-examination. I mean, that's just like a client that doesn't pay their bill for 2 years, right? What Blake's saying, that the automated emails aren't enough. Fine, I'm just kidding. It's so one, I would say, and we did this too. Like we had like our base tiers of kind of the once a year 1040 work, and then folks on the jumbo plan, there was kind of a different process where every 2 weeks they would get a phone call or something if we were waiting on something. So we would kind of delineate that. I will say one thing those tools do really well is they de-skill the act of requesting information. Like you have an explicit list for the first time, not an ambiguous PDF organizer that maybe an admin can't understand. Like it gave them a more actionable list to do that follow-up. And it just depends like where your firm lands on kind of the white glove end of the spectrum. We had folks kind of on both ends of the spectrum. But yeah, it's whatever's going to resonate with your clients the most for sure.
Yeah. The hardest thing for me as a client is getting this long list of documents that I have to collect in like one big checklist. Because then I see that and I immediately close it because I say, I don't have time for this right now. I'll do it later. And it's like overwhelming, right? How do you make it so it's easy for the client to get started? Because then once you get started, it's a lot easier, right? But you also need everything. Like Keila said, you need everything before you can actually do the return. So you don't want them sending documents in piecemeal, but like psychologically, maybe that is a good way to get them going. At least it works for me that way because I'm a procrastinator.
The other thing that I was just going to add to that real fast is if you do have people who are answering the phone, you want to keep as much of the process as consistent as possible. I know how easy it becomes. I called you and then they just texted the firm instead of putting it into the portal because you were already on the phone with them. So to the extent that you can make that a really repeatable process, that if they call, the client is logging into their portal and uploading the thing that they need. Otherwise, you create a new problem of, yes, I have the documents, but they live in 14 different places because one time they called and one time they text and 2 times they emailed. You create a new job for the person that was answering the phone of like, get all of these documents into one place.
So I want to go back to one of the survey questions that we asked you all. So we asked you if you could wave a magic wand and fix one thing in your firm, what would it be? And the overwhelming responses are something like this: more people, staffing, more qualified people, competent, happy staff. So maybe Keila, starting with you first. How do we get the right team in place? Is this something that's constantly evolving? What tips do you have to kind of making sure you've got the right staff going into tax season? We know there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is like the obvious thing. Everybody is struggling with this in one way or another. We're struggling at different levels and at different ways, but we're all kind of looking for the same people. I think one of the things that we can do is the more you embrace technology, the more of a different kind of person that you need to hire. If you can get a portal and a tool that's reminding people or whatever all these things are that can kind of do the base level work, you can then focus on getting a person in who's the right culture fit, who matches your clients, who is doing exactly like the task that you want them to do. And you don't necessarily need as many people. The other thing that I will say is if you bring people in with the expectation that they're just going to have to work a lot, like why should they choose you? So if they already work at a firm that makes them work 65 to 80 hours a week, and you're like, yeah, that's just tax season, you will probably have to do that here too. There's less of an incentive for them to want to work at your firm. We are really mindful about bandwidth. One of the things that Little Fish is like, I don't want everybody to be full, because if you're full, I can't bring on another client. I can't do extra work. We are always at the top of our capacity. And so any ways that you can make space in your firm so that somebody who is coming in has the opportunity to both add to the workflow and the things that they're doing for you, but also improve processes, you're better off in looking for a specific type of person versus a lot of the turnover I feel like comes from bringing in the same type of person, making them work too much. They quit, go to another firm where they have to do the same thing. How can you set your firm apart from those in the ways that you want to work for both your team and your clients?
Yeah, in our firm, we did really well recruiting because we would let our bookkeepers choose how many hours they wanted to work. You had to have a minimum because otherwise we were paying ridiculous per seat prices for all of the apps we were using. But you could work 20 hours a week if you wanted to, year round. And not a lot of firms were willing to do that. And I never really understood it.
Jason, any thoughts on this staffing problem? I know you've talked a bit too about potentially looking at onshore versus offshore. What's your recommendations to firms on having the right people in seats?
People are definitely looking offshore now. That is a growing trend for small firms. I would say the bigger over the top thing to think about is like be for someone, like be for a specific type of person. If you go to your website right now and it says, we enable peace of mind, or like this, you could have a whole bingo card of just like accounting firm website isms. If that's all it is, then like I think we have to be realistic about like why would someone want to come work for me? Like why am I a better opportunity than something else? And there was maybe an age when it was a privilege to have a job and work for you, but that doesn't feel like where we are right now. So like being really good for a specific type of person, whether that's by serving a specific type of client or even setting up, employment, like Blake's talking about, who's the profile of person who wants that flexibility? Like, are you building an awesome place to work for, new moms or something like that? Like there's so many different types of super talented people where if you can optimize for that group, that's exciting. But then the big thing is you got to be visible in what you do as well. And it's so easy for us to be heads down in the work all the time, never coming up, never talking about what we do and going out and seeing people because maybe that's not our comfort zone. But all the great employees you get, the biggest thing I hear is like, well, we got lucky with this person. Like we got them off on Indeed or something like that. We lucked out. You have control over luck. Like the more visible you are, the bigger the surface area for luck. So if you make this really cool thing, like go out and tell people about it. Like don't be shy about it, even though that's probably our nature. Be visible because that's going to multiply the likelihood that you do get that great connection.
Nice. I love that point of being more visible. I know you all, joining us on webinars like this, creating content yourselves. For the people at home that are not quite putting themselves out there as much. Any actionable tips on ways they can build up the brand of their firm, their personal brand? Like what are some starting points there?
Well, the thing that I'm seeing firm owners do that is like just fantastic. It's like what Jason has done with his community for accountants is you create a community for entrepreneurs, for the type of people that might be your client. And I think somebody was mentioning this in the chat. For a monthly fee, you have access into this community to ask questions. I will be in there. I will help answer your questions. And so it's a way for people to get some access to you without becoming a client. And then when they're ready to become a client, maybe they do. And it can actually be a really nice source of revenue, surprising. So, that's one option. And of course, then there's what Keila does with her podcast, right? And building an audience on her show, Build to Enough, it's like a built-in lead generation machine right there, and showcases her expertise. Right. I'm curious, Keila, like, how has having the podcast worked out for you in terms of building your client base?
It's been a It's been really good to provide background beyond just the tips and tricks that I think that a lot of accountants think of when they're thinking about making content of like how to save on taxes and, how to get your bookkeeping in order in, a week or less or whatever that ends up looking like. It's really given the opportunity to say, this is what I know is going on in your business. And this is how that ends up impacting your finances and why you need to be paying attention to it. And I think like even just a lower lift version of that is making content on a platform where you're already comfortable and or where your clients are telling some version of a client story. Like you are always experiencing something with the people that you work with and you did something in that moment and you can tell people about it. I think people overthink content sometimes. And if you listen to some of my podcasts, I'm just like, I would like to talk about this today. And that's what we're going to go into. And there's no agenda except the fact that I ran into this. I know that other people are experiencing it. This is how you can get support on it. And if you're not ready for support, these are the things that you need to be looking out for. And then the last thing I'll add to that is people are really afraid of giving away free information as if it will take away from people signing up with them. And I promise you, they're not going to do it themselves. I don't care how much free information you give them. They're going to be like, appreciate it. Where can I sign up? Because I still don't actually want to do it. So I would say get rid of that fear too. It can feel daunting to make a new thing that has to make you money in order for it to be worth it. And you just have to kind of eliminate this idea of direct ROI on it and just start doing something, because that's how you figure out what you're good at, what's working and what's not, and whether you're actually talking to the people that you mean to talk to.
I would just add, because I mean, it's like I'm trying to have perspective of, 4 or 5 years ago, I had never done anything on social media, and like on the other side of creating content and all that, like kind of where your frame of mind is at is different than when you're like, I'm in the middle of tax season, and you're telling me I have to build a content marketing strategy, and invest time in this. Like, I think the biggest thing for me that was blocking me in the beginning was like over worrying about polish and what are other people going to say and all these different things. And it's like, I mean, the best advice I can give people is like, nobody gives a crap. Like they really don't. Like, we have this spotlight effect that makes us think everybody's going to see this and they're going to form opinions. And oftentimes it's very specific people that come in your mind where you're like, I'm not going to post this because of this person, just in case they see it. But I can tell you, for me at least, like the greatest thing that's come from being visible is the stuff that I can't plan at all. And we come into it with this ROI focus because we're accountants and we're like, okay, I spend this amount of time on it, I got to get this back from it. But that's such a limiting worldview when you've literally got a platform where you can go connect with over 1 billion people. Yet we are trying to somehow like dictate, oh no, I'm going to post this and then this person is going to see it. It's not about that. Like for me, it's just about being helpful and like engaging with folks and joining in the conversation, not because there's even an super specific outcome that you're looking for, but just because you're going to meet incredible people along the way that will actually like unlock this path that, I mean, you wouldn't have imagined. Like, I mean, Blake, there was a time in Blake's life where he would have not imagined running, the accounting podcast and all of the things that you do now. Like, I definitely feel this way about what I do. Even Keila is very prominent speaker. Like, I hang with Keila at conferences. She's got a podcast a bunch of people listen to. There was a day when none of these people identified as the type of person that would get on an Ignition webinar. And like, it just kind of starts with like being out there and meeting people, making connections. And like, you would be amazed at the cool opportunities that just come up as a result.
Yeah, I'm so inspired by Jason because it's true. Like you didn't make a video on YouTube 4 years ago, right? That's how recent this is. And I love when you share your like first Loom videos. those make me feel a lot better about my own attempts. And Keila has been on like the cover of Journal of Accountancy now, right? And it's kind of similar story, right? You weren't very active a few years ago. And I've only had my podcast for like 7 years, and for 3 of it, nobody listened to it, right? So it's going to take some years. It's not going to happen overnight, but yeah, like it's all doable. I would add one thing, which is like, and it goes to Keila's point about like time. And it's really hard to find the time to do this when you're running a practice. So you want to be really like careful about how much you commit to. So like doing one thing at a time and focusing on that is probably a really good idea. And when it comes to like communities, that can also be a big lift to build a community. Jason will tell you all about that, right? It's a lot up front. And maybe one of the ways to get into it is to find another community of like people that you want to serve, and just ask the owner, like get into that community and say, hey, can I be the accountant in your community? Can I answer questions? Can I help out? That might be a good way to get started.
I think those are also good reminders that like you're already so much further ahead than most accountants if you make anything. Like most people are making nothing. So if you make one video a month or one newsletter a quarter or whatever that thing is, don't get so caught up on like I have to put something out every day or 3 times a day or once a week. Get yourself on a consistency that makes sense for you, but recognize that just thinking about making the thing is further ahead than most other people in our industry. And so it makes for a space where your voice can and should be heard.
Love it. I do want to make sure we get that poll question in. So be honest, how often do you have to chase late payments? A little transition here back into what we're probably thinking about more is getting paid for this tax work. So we'll go ahead and get that question answered. And then we are in this next few questions here going to focus in on the tech. I know there's been a lot of questions and comments coming in around what are you using for this? What are you using for that? So I want to make sure we can kind of circle back to some of those items and potentially give some folks a few actionable things they can go do some research on afterwards. So this is the question of be honest, how often are you chasing late payments? How many people are being honest here? Okay, we've got rarely, I've got good systems in place. Sometimes they're just manageable, too often. Okay, fair enough. People are being honest, so thank you for that. Jason, I know we talked about intake earlier, so I want to come back to that. Maybe just recap that again, like how is that different than traditional organizers? And then would love to kind of like have you share a few different applications folks could check out, or if you've got certain resources you want that you could point people to on best ways to evaluate those type of tools.
Yeah, so I can tell you the evolution my firm went through. We did about 1,600 1040s a year and did it the way that most people do them. We mass send out, the PDF pro forma organizer from the tax software. We tried sometimes to use the portal that the tax software provided, but man, that thing was rough. And so we'd send that out, and sometimes people would send stuff back. And as soon as they send it back, you kind of have an obligation to do something with it. And so it takes somebody sitting down and, usually it would go on a shelf. And then a couple of weeks later, somebody would pull it out and they would say, okay, here's what we have, what we don't have. You send off an email, whatever. That got really hard in tax season because those things would sit there for longer and longer. Then we switched to the strategy of somebody has to review this as soon as it comes in, and we'll contact them immediately saying what they're missing. And that was a little better, but it didn't ultimately solve the problem of just the starting and the stopping of trying to track down all this information. These days, like software nails this. The tools from our tax software platforms, unfortunately, are super, super rudimentary and don't do this well. The two best tools that I send people to for this, one's called Soraban, Soraban. The other is Stanford Tax. The reason I like them, they take pro forma information, either from a backup file from last year's tax software or even from the PDF organizer. They'll pull the details off of there. They build a questionnaire that's not a boilerplate questionnaire. I don't want to waste my client like Blake's time with that. It's a totally customized questionnaire that only asks them the stuff that I actually need. And then I don't start the project, to Keila's point, until I've got everything. And even if it saves me one pickup and put down, like, man, across all of my tax returns, that is saving me so much time.
Jason. And Blake, I know you've been, you share a lot of great content out there about advancements in AI and how people can kind of keep up with new ChatGPT and other things. What are some kind of actionable tips that you use in your day-to-day, potentially leveraging tools like that to just save some of that admin time? Maybe a few examples or one example to share with folks.
So the thing that gave me a stomach ache the whole time I owned my firm, and I never got over it, was pricing. I always felt like I was giving the wrong price. And you will likely feel the same way, because we don't become accountants because we're good at sales, right? It's kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum in a lot of ways. And I am just like in love with AI for helping me price. If I have a consulting opportunity, I can take the entire email thread and put it into a chat, and ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity with the new R1 DeepSeek reasoning, and I can say, summarize the key terms, right? And I look at those and I make sure those are right, and I say, okay, now let's come up with a price. Give me a high price, give me a low price. Go out and search the web if you're using Perplexity, and see what the world might say about this. And it at least is a way to gut check yourself. Right. There's always the other advice I've always heard is have your spouse double check your pricing, right? Because they are looking out for the budget as well. They have an interest, and they also have they have your best interest at heart, and you tend to underprice. That's what I did anyway. So you can use AI as like a sounding board for this, and it is quite impressive. I give it a shot.
Nice. I love that. Always, now we're used to starting to have these conversations with AI. So, you just, does this sound right? What do you think? So I love that.
And you can improve on this, right? You could create a custom GPT where you upload like previous examples of pricing you've done. Like, here's a scope of work, here's a price. Give it like 10 examples from your firm, and it'll get better and better and better at pricing new engagements. So I think that's a great way to like integrate AI in a way that is not just like a lot of copy paste, which, like, if you try to use it for actual accounting work, it's hit or miss.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what Keila and Jason think.
Yeah, I feel like we use a lot of ChatGPT and other tools for communications more than the work. To your point about asking your spouse, I would say that is especially important for women, because if we are generally underpriced, women are especially underpriced. And my husband, who knows nothing about accounting, is quick to throw out a price and just point at me like $5,000. And I'm like, based on what? Like, what did you have no information, and you just think that should be the number, but at least usually will start me higher than I would have been thinking about on my own. And to the point that you can use AI to help kick that off for you with some information. It's definitely been helpful for us to have custom GPTs that have information about the firm, knows the kind of client that we're servicing, knows what we already offer, especially when we're coming up with custom plans, which we don't do that often, but it helps a lot there.
Of course I can. Can I shield for Ignition here on the pricing conversation? Because I think if I could tell you what a difference it made for our firm. Going to Ignition and having the flexibility to give clients different package options when I was renewing them was the best way I found to mitigate what we're talking about, where I have this intense fear of overpricing myself, because the people who complain take up way too much headspace. Like, those are the folks you're always thinking about. You don't think about the folks who would probably happily pay more for what you do. You're thinking about the complainers, right? Like, there's something evolutionary about that. But when you have the option to set up like a 3 or 4 package proposal option, you can put a YOLO price on there. Like, you can use that to price anchor, the one in the middle that maybe you actually want them to pick. But I can tell you some of the most like biggest turning points in my firm were situations where I put that YOLO price on there and the person picked it without breaking a sweat. Just didn't even blink. They're like, yep, nope, let's go do this. Totally makes sense. And you're like, oh, hang on. There's like a whole nother world here that I didn't realize existed. Does this person have any friends? Why are they valuing what I do for them so much? And when the only way that I can bill them, sick transition, Ryan. And when the only way that I can bill them is like a static Word document or whatever they paid last year plus 5%, like you never learn. Do they actually have the means and the willingness to go to something else and kind of find that unlock?
We were already using like a tiered pricing situation before we got to Ignition, but we were not doing official renewals until we started using Ignition. So there were a lot of people. I never had an issue with initial pricing. I always had an issue with like, I think you should pay more. And I don't know when I should tell you that. Like, I missed my chance at the end of the year. So now I have to wait until the middle of the year. Ignition making it really easy for me to tell everybody at once, it's January, guys, and the new price is this. So you can either stay with us or not, but like, this is what it looks like, made it easier to get out of my head than those one-off emails that were like, I'm writing you today to let you know that there's been a change here at Little Fish and how we're doing things. And then I'm waiting for them to respond and thinking that they're going to argue me down on what this costs. It just felt better for that to go from what felt like a middle party to say like, sign up for the thing that tells me that you're coming back. And I know that you're not if you don't hit the button. Just took a lot of anxiety away from me doing it directly as a one-on-one person.
I would just add one thing to this, which is like sort of conceptually, one thing I've learned about pricing over the years is that I was doing it backwards for a long time. I was trying to figure out everything that the client needed and then come up with a price for that scope of services. When the way clients actually think about it, subconsciously, most of the time, is they know what they want to pay. And so it's a lot easier to simply figure out what they are willing to pay and then design packages close to that. So this is why it's always a great idea to do bookkeeping if you have an accounting firm, because the first thing I would do was get a copy of the QuickBooks file or get access, and then I would see what they had been paying, right? And so that anchor gives you a lot of information. And you can then design your 3 packages based on that information. What were they paying? What were they getting before? Knowing that is very powerful.
Also, I just want to add to that, have confidence in the fact that you can do better than the accountants that are doing the work. I think a lot of people anchor their prices to like what other accountants are doing. And then when clients come to them, they feel like they have to defend like why theirs is more. And I always tell clients like, we don't compete on price because you came to me, told me that you paid significantly less and it was trash. And here's all the things that went wrong. And I'm saying, I'm charging you more because we're not going to do that. And so just be really careful because it can feel like you're matching up your prices to people who don't serve or do the same work as you. We don't even call things the same thing in our industry. And if you are too attached to what like the market is doing, you can find yourself undercharging for a service that you're innately going to do better and not giving yourself credit for.
Yeah, that's a great point. Don't if the client has left their current accountant because they are unhappy, do not match the price. It should be a lot. It should be significantly more, and they should be willing to pay more to get better service. Absolutely.
We are coming near the top of the hour here, so I do want to give first thank you, Jason, Keila, and Blake for coming on here today, sharing your expertise. We're really appreciative that you came on here today. I know all of you, you put out a lot of great content. You're going to be at events. Maybe just starting with Jason and then going around the horn here. What's the best place for people to interact with your content, communities, maybe an event you'll be at? So yeah, Jason first, and we'll kind of go around here.
Good for y'all being here during busy season. We're talking about whether or not your average accounting firm runners don't turn up to something like this to grow during busy season. I do a bunch of things. The biggest one's probably the podcast. It's called Jason on Firms. And about, I don't know, 1,300 accounting firm owners are tuning into that every day. And we just talk shop on running small accounting firms.
Blake, what about you?
Check out the Earmark app, earmark.app. You can earn CPE, CE for listening to podcasts. So if you're an enrolled agent, you need your IRS CE, we've got that. Look for the purple IRS CE banner on those courses. And then if you're a CPA, you got to get your 40 hours a year of continuing education. Why not get it listening to podcasts instead of sitting in a seminar? So I hope you like it.
And then you can find me. I'm probably most active on Instagram and Threads at Little Fish Accounting. I also run a podcast called Build to Enough, which is for small service providers, including firms, typically with one owner and really small teams. They're all solo, so they're short. They're usually about 15 minutes or so. And I put those out every other week with Earmark.